So what is minimal stimulation IVF, and could it be a good option for me? Hey everybody, I'm Kendra with Hannah's Heart, and today I want to talk to you about mini IVF or minimal stimulation IVF. Just to let you know, I'm getting ready to start a round of mini IVF in just a few weeks, and this is an option that I'm really passionate about because a lot of people haven't heard of it, and I think it could be a really good alternative for other people who, like me, maybe are not comfortable with the idea of freezing embryos or having a lot of extra embryos. First of all, I want to say that within the world of artificial reproductive technology, there is a wide range of what different people's personal convictions are. And I'm not trying to tell people what they need to do by any means. I think that's something between you and God that you have to pray about. I think there's a wide range of different things that God can bless. But what I do want to invite couples to do is, if you believe that life begins at conception, I want to help you to be able to be consistent with that biblical worldview and to understand the implications of all of these procedures, because you can get lost in the medicalese. That being said, I do believe that there is a certain area where we can draw a line in the sand and can say, God does not bless this. If you believe that life begins at conception, then discarding precious life would be inconsistent with a biblical worldview, and is something that we should guard against. That's something that we should not put ourselves in a situation where that could be a possibility. And that means asking hard questions. That means maybe saying no to a procedure. And that's very difficult. And I understand that that's a hard thing for Christians who desire to have a child to wrestle with. But I want to be clear, there's some gray area where God may call you to do this and not this, but then there is a certain areas where we need to stand firm on the Word of God. And I'll try to help give you my thoughts on where that line is. So anyways, what is minimal stimulation IVF? So minimal stimulation IVF essentially attempts to create 3 to 6 eggs per woman's cycle, rather than the traditional IVF that does about 10 to 20. Now with traditional IVF, you can go as high as sometimes 40. So they're giving you some medication that will stimulate your ovaries to help the follicles that are there, help them remain strong and try to produce a healthy egg. So then they collect those eggs, they go in and have a retrieval. A certain number of the eggs will be mature, and then they will try to fertilize those. And of the ones that fertilize, only a certain number will continue on. They watch for several days under a microscope to see that the cells are dividing at a normal, healthy rate. And then of the ones that are remaining and are alive, often they'll do something called pre-implantation genetic testing. They'll try to determine which ones are the most normal, and only the normal ones will they implant into a woman's uterus and try to have a pregnancy. So with the difference between regular IVF and mini IVF is dealing with the number of eggs that you are trying to retrieve, and as well as the number of eggs that you are trying to fertilize, and the end number of embryos, which that's life. When we use the word embryo, that is conception has occurred, that is a baby. So why did I decide to do mini IVF? A couple reasons. First and foremost, for our family, it was an ethical thing. When we looked at the traditional protocol of IVF, we were not comfortable with several things. We were not comfortable with the idea that we might create more embryos than our family would be able to raise. You know, if you have 40 eggs in a cycle and 20 of them become embryos, and we can't have that. Or, even just having them frozen made me very nervous. I'm still unsure about all of the process of freezing eggs and what that does to an embryo. The thought of having so many embryos in a freezer somewhere that I may or may not ever be able to get to made me really scared. And now I will say this, for some couples, Christian couples that pursue regular IVF, their situations can be different. And if they are committed to not discarding any embryos and they have a plan in place for what that looks like, even if that means that they're not able to continue with IVF, that they would put those embryos up for adoption in that situation, then I can see how that could potentially be consistent with a biblical worldview. But that's hard. And my husband and I considered, like, I don't think we could put our embryos up for adoption if we had to. So we kind of made this commitment. We are only going to be able to create as many as we feel comfortable transferring. And ideally as many as we feel comfortable transferring in that cycle, so we can avoid frozen embryos altogether. So that was our first thing, was the ethical. Also, the genetic testing that I mentioned. So what genetic testing is screening for is any of those abnormalities, like chromosomal issues, so like Down syndrome or cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correct, disease, spinal muscular atrophy. There's some chromosomal with the X chromosome issues that arrive. So they're screening for all of those things. The idea is that if it is a Down syndrome baby, that embryo is then discarded. So that was a absolute line in the sand no for my husband and I. If it's a life that's created, it doesn't matter what sort of complications may come later in that child's life. That's sacred, and it's made in the image of God and does not need to be destroyed. Not to mention the fact that the actual genetic testing that they do on embryos can damage the embryo. So you could have a perfectly normal, healthy embryo that you then end up damaging and killing through the testing process. Now, that's not typically the case, but it is a risk. It is a factor. So that's something to consider. So that was reason number one for us, was the ethical decision. Reason number two was financial. So IVF is so expensive, and man, you can go in debt over it. The decision of how much is too much for your family to invest is something that I think is between you and God, and you get in your prayer closet. And certainly I think the Lord doesn't want you to have to, mortgage your house and eat beans and be stressed. Like, there's a certain point at which I think you're not being a good steward if you keep trying and trying and trying and having failure through procedures. But what that point is, I think, is for each couple to determine. But for us, we were really excited to learn that mini IVF is about half, if not less than half, the cost of regular IVF. So yay, that was a big financial relief for us. In fact, you could probably do at least 2 tries of mini stem IVF for the cost of one. So our third reason that we loved mini IVF was that it was less invasive and just less medicine in a woman's body. So I'm one of those people that, like, I only take an ibuprofen if it's really bad. Like, I'm a wait and see before we go to the doctor. I don't like to take antibiotics. I'm a little bit of a crunchy mama. So the idea of anything foreign being added to my body was not exciting to me. Now, some women are afraid of injections. I mean, I don't just love injections, but that wasn't a factor for me. But I know some people that like the thought of all of the injections that you have to have with IVF is a major factor for them. I am happy to report that if you decide to go the mini IVF round, it is a lot fewer injections and a lot less medicine, which means there's fewer risks. So some of the risks of those medications involve ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is basically where your ovaries just get so stimulated. That's for the woman who might create 40 follicles or 40 eggs. And I've heard awful stories of women who just are like so bloated and have to go to emergency rooms in the middle of their IVF procedure. That's not the typical, but it's more common than you would think. And the nice thing about mini IVF is it's just a gentler approach. So as far as success rates go, let's talk about that. It's easy to think that more is more when it comes to eggs and embryos. And in a certain sense, it is. You get more tries, right? But high numbers of eggs does not necessarily equate the health and the quality of the egg. So they are finding that a lot of women who have had failed attempts of IVF are actually doing better with mini IVF. Some women's bodies just don't respond well to that much medication, and it's a higher quality egg that's collected, and that ends in an embryo that is much more likely to be able to survive. So that's a huge benefit. And when I realized, like, I'm not trying to be the Duggars. Like, we want a few children, but we don't need that many. I can work a little more closely with my body's natural number of eggs. And it's a little more my body's natural process. So You might ask, well, do you have to have any medication at all? No, you don't. There's actually something called natural cycle IVF. And for those of you that don't want any chance of having to freeze an embryo, or you don't want to have multiple eggs, or you really just want to go by a woman's natural cycle, you absolutely can do that. And that's even cheaper than mini IVF. So yay for that perk. No, I think there's like one injection that you have to have for natural cycle IVF. So you might ask the question, like, why would you do mini IVF then and not the natural cycle? So the process of when they go in and retrieve eggs involves you to have anesthesia, and it's not fun, and it's costly. When we kind of talked through our choices, we felt really comfortable with the idea of let's try to get 3 eggs, or 4 eggs, maybe max. So basically, let me explain to you how that breaks down. So let's just say that I had a really good, again, the average, they say 3 to 6 is what they're going for, but I want to say 3 is what the average is for minimal stimulation IVF. So let's just say I had my body really responded to the medication, and I had 4 eggs that were retrieved. So then what they're going to do is they're going to try to fertilize those eggs. Now, let's say maybe 3 of those eggs were mature. One of them wasn't very mature. So only 3 ended up fertilizing, right? So then they're going to watch it for several days. And I think it's only 40% of embryos that are fertilized will, by the time they're ready to transfer, that embryo will still be viable and still be alive. So you've created a life at that point, but many of them just stop developing. And for those of you think those statistics sound absolutely ridiculous, and you're like, what is IVF doing to harm all of these babies? That's actually just that's nothing to do with the IVF process. That's what happens naturally because we live in a fallen world. So if you were getting pregnant naturally with your spouse, often what happens is conception might happen. And before, so conception is when the sperm and the egg meet. It's in your little fallopian tube and it's traveling down into your uterus. And before it has the chance to implant, it stops growing. Your body never even knows that it's pregnancy. So you would never know that happened. And that's just because of genetic problems. That's a whole nother video we could go into. Why is infertility so high? Why are so many eggs not good quality? Why are sperm not so good? That's dealing with just some of the toxins, age. It can be so many different factors. So when the egg implants in the uterus, that's technically considered pregnancy. So it sends a signal to your body to produce a hormone that lets you know, hey, body, we're pregnant. Let's put all our time and resource into developing this human. It's also, they think, the hormone that makes you want to puke your guts out. Back to mini IVF. So only a certain number of them will develop by the time they're ready to put it into your uterus in hopes that it will implant. So let's say, go back to my example, we had 4 eggs, 3 of them fertilized, and 1 or maybe 2 survived by the time it's time to transfer them. So if 2 survived, we're comfortable with that. Like, twins would be perfectly fine. And part of this process means my husband and I always taking the perspective of if there's an embryo that's created, our desire is for it to thrive, and we're never gonna create something that we hope some of them don't thrive. So we are always hopeful for however many are created to get to come into our family, knowing statistically that probably won't happen, but making a plan for if it does. So we would be comfortable with twins. Our doctor is comfortable with us having 2 embryos implanted, but the chances of both of them implanting are very low. And in fact, the chances per transfer is just 40% of actually that embryo sticking to your uterus and resulting in a pregnancy. So we kind of felt like mini stim was a better use of our money resources and our time resources. So time. Let's talk about, my husband and I are going to be traveling to a clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee. Why are we going 6 hours away for fertility treatments? Because unfortunately, a lot of places do not offer mini stim IVF. So I don't know what reasons they would give you, but I have my theories. I think there's a lot more money to be made with regular IVF. It's the typical protocol. It's also your chances per cycle are higher because of the higher number of eggs that are being collected. So statistically, I think it looks better on paper. But let's talk about your chances with mini IVF versus regular IVF. Per egg that is transferred, they're the same. So there's nothing really different in the process, and you only need one embryo to have a baby. In regular IVF, what they would do is if they have, let's say they transfer one and that does not result in pregnancy, they have more frozen that they can pull out of the freezer. Okay, let's try again. So you would have to go and do the egg retrieval process again if you didn't have frozen embryos with mini IVF. My husband and I, our goal, just to be clear, going into mini IVF, our goal is to not have any to freeze at all. But if we were in a situation where, let's say, we ended up with 3 embryos and we could safely transfer 2, this would be kind of a stretch that we would even get to that situation. If we had to freeze one, it's not ideal, but we would feel comfortable committing to, we're coming back for you. As you know, if this first one results in pregnancy, a year and a half later, when we can safely try again, my age is still where I feel comfortable being able to do that. But the nice thing about mini IVF, let me make this clear, is you can tell them, well, it's regular IVF as well, but you could tell them exactly what you're comfortable with. If you say, I do not want any that are going to be left over frozen, so I only want 2 eggs to be retrieved, and I only want 2 eggs to be fertilized, and I only want 2 eggs to be transferred. Like, you can do it that way if that's what you're comfortable with. So I talked about the ethical reasons, I talked about the financial reasons, I talked about the medical, like the less invasive reasons. So other reasons that people other than me might consider wanting to do mini IVF. If you've had several failed regular IVF cycles, you could be a really good candidate for this. Like I said, some people's body just doesn't respond well to the medication, and they will do mini IVF, a gentler approach, and their body responds really well. So that might be you. If you have low ovarian reserve, so that's the number of follicles that are then like producing eggs per month. It's like, why give you so much medication to stimulate if you don't have many to begin with? So for some people, that's a good option. If you have an injection aversion, we talked about that. Or if you are at a high risk of the OHSS, that's the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So those are our reasons. That's what mini IVF is. You might have to look hard to find a clinic that offers it, or you may have to ask your clinic if they would consider it, and make sure that they would give you the better price, because you don't need to be paying for regular IVF if you're getting mini IVF. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at hannahsheart@afa.net. I don't mind talking about this. Several of you have already reached out to me because you've listened to me talk about this and our journey on the show, and you've had questions, and some of you have pursued mini IVF, and that's exciting for me. I recently heard of someone who did a regular IVF protocol and ended up with extra frozen embryos, and it just really broke my heart, because I know they are a follower of Christ and they were completely comfortable with just discarding those, and that's life. And so I'm not trying to condemn any individual. That's not my heart, isn't to heap condemnation, especially if somebody's already made this decision and it's too late to change your mind. But what I want to do is help educate people to know what these medical procedures are, so that you can live your life to be consistent with what you say you believe. So yeah, feel free to contact us for more information. I will be starting a blog on our journey. I'll probably release this a couple months after everything, just to give our family time to process whatever news and whatever answer the Lord has for us. But I'm going to have a couple of videos, not just through our process, but also how to cling to God during this hard journey. So thanks for watching.